Casting a Plat-Sil Gel 25 silicone head. Today we're going to show how to cast a severed head copy using the resin mold we made in a previous video, using Plat-Sil Gel 25 and a foam core inside. Now this is the EasyFlow 120 head mold we made in a previous video, and you can click on that link and that will take you over to that previous video. Now before we begin the casting process, we'll need to release our mold properly. And to do that we need a light spray of either 2500 mold release or the Ultra 4 epoxy par film mold release. Both of those are great spray releases for releasing silicone from a resin mold. Now today we're going to use Plat-Sil Gel 25, a fairly low viscosity sister product to Gel 10 and Gel 00. And that's going to allow us to slosh a skin into our head mold. Now we're actually going to do two processes on this. Since we have to build up two layers of silicone, we're going to do a brush-in layer as well as a slosh coat later, just so you can see how two approaches can be done for the same application. Now we're going to start by measuring out about 200 grams of Plat-Sil Gel 25 Part A. And just like the other Plat-Sil gels, Gel 25 is a translucent color and a pourable liquid unless we add something to it. So we're going to start out by adding a small amount of our flesh tone, and that's a good generic flesh tone that's kind of right in the middle of between light and dark skin flesh tones. And then we're going to tweak that a little bit by adding a little bit of flocking. And to do that we're going to add some tan flocking and some yellow flocking and some red. And the nice thing about flocking is, unlike the paste pigments, when it's stirred in, it doesn't dissolve into the surrounding liquid. So it stays as tiny little dots of color. And that's what gives silicone, especially translucent silicone, a high level of realism, having those little dots of colors that give it that natural mottled look of real organic tissue. Now remember, this is just our Part A that we're mixing all our colors into. So as soon as we've got that to the color we want, we're ready to add our Part B. And it's a good idea when you're starting out doing this technique, keep a notebook nearby and note the things that you're putting into your mixture so you can reproduce it later. And also keep track of which parts you've measured out. You can write it on the side of the mixing cup or on the table you're working on, but make sure you note that you've just mixed up Part A. And now we're ready to measure out Part B. And again, we're going to measure out 200 parts B since this is a 1-to-1 mix ratio. And this particular silicone, you could do this by weight or volume. But I found in my experience that weight is much more accurate. And then on top of that, weight is much less wasteful. You don't have to hit certain marks on your graduated container to get a 1-to-1 mix ratio. So that allows you to work in much smaller batches. So when in doubt, always defer to weight because it is much more accurate and a lot more economical in your use of materials. Now we're going to stir in our Part B into our Part A. And you want to keep your pigments handy just in case sometimes when you mix the two parts together it might be a little bit more translucent than you wanted it to be, and you might need to add a little bit more pigment to it. But in this case, this is exactly what we want it to be. With a little experience of mixing silicone, you can add that just to your Part A or B, and once you add in the other component, it'll be exactly the way you want it to be. Now, Gel 25 has a 5-minute working time and a 1-hour demold, so we need to move fast. Now, as I stated earlier, we can either brush this in or slosh this into our mold. And for our first coat, I wanted to show the way we can actually brush this into place. If you have large, more complicated molds, a lot of times brushing it in is preferable so you don't have to worry about it slumping into low-lying areas and creating expensive puddles of silicone. So we're going to brush this into our mold first. And again, we want to move fast because we only have about 5 minutes of working time here. So you'll notice I'm scraping this out into both sides of the mold, and at the beginning, even though we've added the thickener, it's still going to be a little bit on the runny side. It takes the Tin-Thix thickener a little bit of time to react with the silicone, so it'll gradually start to thicken up. If you've watched some of our other videos where we do life casts with Gel 25, you've seen this effect before, where it has this gradual thickening effect. And that effect works to our advantage when we're brushing it into the detailed surface of a mold like this. Now, one of the things we're going to do is we want to first coat the inside of the mold, and then I want a little bit, just a small amount, to go over onto the flange area. And that way we don't have a little gap there when we put the two halves of the mold together. And we want to work fast. This has a 5-minute working time and a 1-hour demold time. So we want to make sure we work quick, and you'll notice on the back half of the head, it's starting to thicken up significantly there. So it's about time for us to stop messing with it and push the two halves of the mold together. Now we're going to let that gel and strap that together so those two halves bond together. And we're going to slosh in the next layer. Now that we've closed the mold and we don't have access to the inside, this is where Gel 25 can be sloshed around on the inside to complete that skin. And this just ensures that our skin has a good thickness to it. What we're going for is about a 1/4 inch thick skin. And here I've mixed up another 400 grams, and it's a good idea at this point to have someone help you. So we've got Larry there holding the mold upright so we can pour that in. And notice we didn't add the Tin Thicks thickener. We want this to be a pourable, runny liquid. But it's just thick enough, just its regular natural viscosity is thick enough to help it cling to the sides of the mold as we slosh that around. Now remember that Plat-Seal Gel 25 has a 5-minute working time at 70 degrees or room temperature. So you want to move quick, and when you're starting out working with fast setting materials like this, it's a good idea to keep a timer handy, set for about 5 minutes or a little bit under the working time, and that way you have a little bit of warning before the material starts to kick. Now if you're working on fairly large, complicated molds, that may take more time than 5 minutes, you can always add the 7173R or the retarder component to allow for more working time. Now you'll notice we're working over a mixing cup there, and the reason for that is sometimes to get the low-lying areas around the neck or the opening of the mold, we have to pour it all the way back out. So that allows us to catch that material and then pour it back into the mold. So it's always a good idea to keep that mixing cup handy so that you can recycle any material that you have to pour out through the neck opening and make sure that's all incorporated into your casting. Now once that layer of Gel 25 has set up, and for this particular layer we want this completely cured before we move on to the foam step. I like that to cure at least a couple of hours before I pour my polyfoam. If the silicone hasn't completely cured, sometimes that can react with the foam and cause the foam to collapse. So it's a good idea to make sure that the Plat-Seal Gel 25 or Gel 10 is completely cured before you move on to your flexible foam. Now this is F5. This is a 5-pound density flexible foam that just cures bright white. And we're going to add a few drops of polycolor brown. And what that will do is that'll, when that's mixed in, that foam will expand to a very light brown, almost a flesh tone. And what that will do is if we have any areas where we have a thin spot in our silicone skin, if that foam shows through, it doesn't reveal itself as white foam. It just looks like the surrounding skin. And again, this is a 1-to-1 mix ratio foam, so we're adding equal parts of A and B. And typically it takes about 400 to 500 grams to fill an average size head. Depending on how restricted the foam is inside the mold, F5 is going to expand roughly 8 to 10 times the original volume. So after you've experimented with that a little bit, you'll have a little better feel for how that's going to expand to fill the mold. And when in doubt, start with small batches and build up the inside with several batches rather than one batch. You don't want to waste foam or build up too much pressure inside the mold with too much foam. Now, again, to make sure we don't have any voids or little air pockets from the foam expanding too fast, I'm going to slosh it around first inside the mold and then set it back up at an angle to allow the foam to expand to fill the head. And you'll see that here in just a minute. Once we've completely coated the inside of the mold, we're going to set it at an angle on a bucket and then allow the foam to expand. And by setting it at kind of a 45-degree angle there, that eliminates the chance for any little air pockets to form, especially in the face and the chin. And while the foam's rising, you want to leave it alone so you don't cause it to collapse. And typically for F5 in a room temperature environment like this, you will be able to demold the foam in about 45 minutes to an hour. The longer the better on foam. You don't want to rush it and cause the foam to collapse by demolding it too early or to distort. So here we've allowed the foam to cure about an hour, and we're ready to pry open the mold. Now, if you've released the mold properly and everything has been cast properly, it should demold very easily out of an easy flow resin mold like this. And I've got a couple of pry bars there. I just helped break the suction on the back. And the front half of the mold, because of the way we did the ears, you want to push those ears in to break those free from the mold, and then the head will pop out very easily out of the front side of the mold. And you'll notice that because of the way we did the mold with the shims, we have a minimal amount of seam to clean up on our finished cast. And there we have our finished silicone head, cast with a Plat-Sil Gel 25 skin and an F5 flexible foam core. And now ready to clean up the seam and patch any air bubbles, and we'll be ready for the painting and hair punching process. So be sure to check out our other videos on painting Plat-Sil gels. We just posted a painting video a few months back, and also check out our hair punching video for tips on punching hair into Plat-Sil gels. And of course, Plat-Sil Gel 25 and F5 flexible foam are available on our web store at brickintheyard.com.